How do you deal with non-preppers in SHTF? That's something we all need to contemplate now because when there is an SHTF event, most of the people that are involved with it will not be prepared. So stick around for the rest of the video. We're going to talk about how to deal with those people during an emergency and the fact that some of them might become dangerous in an emergency or any kind of long-term SHTF scenario. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're going to talk about how to deal with non-preppers in SHTF. And the fact is that most people will not be preppers in any kind of an emergency situation. Okay, so 78% of Americans, as of right now, aren't prepared to have food or water during any kind of a long-term disaster scenario. They might have enough food or water for 1, 2, maybe 3 days, but after that, it's game over. And that's even with everything we've gone through here in the year 2020. So that should concern you. 41% of Americans aren't even prepared for a basic emergency. And when I say that, what I mean is they're not even prepared to deal with a tornado or the aftermath of a hurricane or a flash flood or anything we know actually happens seasonally around the country. These people might not even have batteries or even bottled water. So knowing that, we have to understand as preppers and people who are worried about preparedness that most of the people around us in any kind of an emergency, large or small, will not be prepared to deal with that emergency. And if you're preparing to be the prepper you are during an emergency and you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're unprepared, hit the subscribe button below because we're going to keep preparing together on this channel and we're going to talk about things we have to contemplate now before we run into them in the future. And what we understand about other people's behavior could actually save our lives as well as the lives of other people during an emergency. Okay, so understanding behavior of people who are unprepared is going to help you be more strategic during any kind of an SHTF event. And the behaviors that a lot of people think about aren't necessarily what you're going to need to expect, okay? A lot of us think that in an emergency, most people will panic. But actually, panic is a rarity. It's not something that happens in every single emergency. In fact, most of the time, communities come together and actually help each other out during an emergency or a disaster style event. So when people are panicking, what's actually happening and what we're actually talking about is them reacting to fear in a rational way. And so when I say that, what I mean is if a building's on fire and I'm in it, I'm going to run as fast as I can out of that building to escape the fire. That's not necessarily panic. That means I'm just reacting rationally to the environment that I'm being presented with. And that's how most people will react. However, there are some different behaviors that you're going to see during an emergency event that you can keep an eye out for and understand what's happening to help everyone's chances of survival, especially yours, as you're the one who's being more prepared and trying to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to emergency preparedness, okay? So these 3 phases of behaviors during an emergency are something we need to watch out for because they could possibly become dangerous. And it's not because of anyone's fault, but it's just because of the outcome of some of these behaviors during a crisis, okay? So the first thing you have to watch out for is denial. So people who are not prepared are going to deny the existence of a need of preparation. And when I say that, what I mean is these are the people who might drive around all day long never wearing a seatbelt because they've never been in an accident, so there's no reason for them to believe that they might be in an accident in the future. Now, we all know that there's those who have been in an accident and those who have not yet been in an accident. However, these people operate under a different mentality. And the same denial pattern comes into play during an actual emergency. And what I mean by that is some people will listen to a fire alarm go off and see the sprinklers go off, and instead of reacting to it, stay at their desk, or maybe they'll stay at their desk to collect some of their personal items and then start heading towards the exit. But the urgency's not there because they live in a state of denial, saying that nothing like this could really happen, so whatever's happening probably has some kind of an explanation other than it being an actual disaster or SHTF scenario. So that's the first behavior you're going to witness. The second behavior that you're going to see is called deliberation, okay? And it's when fear really sets in. When somebody finally realizes that this disaster or this SHTF scenario is actually occurring and actually affecting them, the fear sets in hard, okay? And for some people, it actually takes away their ability to reason. So in that time, their rationale becomes hard to deal with. And if you're somebody who's involved with that scenario and you're trying to maybe move people to an exit or try to figure out an escape route, that person is not going to be acting in a rational way, and they're going to be hard to deal with when it comes to mitigating as much risk as possible. So that being said, you know now that that's the second behavior that some of these people are going to exhibit. And it's because it's a natural reaction to that fear setting in. So you knowing this as someone who's more prepared is now going to be watching out for that irrational person and understanding that it's just their fear setting in based on the emergency they're being presented. So now you can react in a way that gets that person where they need to go and hopefully not create a dangerous situation in the process, because sometimes the irrational thought process can do things like open a door that's currently closed that's the only reason that the flames haven't come into the room yet, if you know what I'm saying, okay? So moving on past that behavior, you're going to get to the final behavior of an emergency situation, which is the moment of action, okay? The decisive moment that somebody has to take in order to survive. And that is one of the most dangerous moments of the behavior pyramid here, because that's when people become paralyzed. That's when fear sets in so strongly that they lose the ability to be mobile. And in those moments, that can sometimes create a barrier or create a roadblock to where people who need to vacate are not able to. And that is a dangerous situation. And we've seen that happen many and many times throughout history when it comes to natural disasters. But knowing that this is going to happen to those people who are less prepared helps you prepare better, because now you can see when those phases are starting to kick in and you can react appropriately. When somebody becomes paralyzed with fear and they can't keep moving, and it's imperative to the survival of everyone else that they get out of the doorway they may be blocking, now you'll understand that you need to move that person one way or the other. Just a suggestion. Look, you got to do what you got to do in an emergency. But knowing that this kind of stuff is going to happen to those people who don't think preparation on a regular basis helps you understand what you're dealing with in those moments. And this can apply to any kind of emergency, natural disaster. It can apply to some kind of an attack. It can apply to a long-term SHTF event, because people react similarly to any fear-based situation as a disaster, okay? So, that being said, your best bet in these scenarios is to maintain your confidence, which is why we prepare. It's not about always just being in full-on preparation mode. It's being confident that if something arises, we can react to it in the right way. And your confidence, by being a prepper and by being somebody who's more prepared than the next person, will help you survive these situations and probably take some of those people out of those behaviors, because they have someone to look to as a leader to get them out of that situation. And that's probably what's going to happen to you, just so you're aware. Dealing with non-preppers often turns into you leading the non-preppers towards preparation. This is just me talking from experience, not necessarily from an emergency, but just from social interactions of people suddenly becoming more prepared just by being around me. So that's something that you can basically expect in any kind of a situation. Doesn't matter if it's a short-term or a long-term SHTF scenario, people will react that way because of your confidence and your ability to survive, okay? But something else we haven't fully talked about yet, because dealing with non-preppers is something we do right now, but it's something we know will happen when we move into an SHTF event, especially a long-term one. But what about the dangerous people who aren't dangerous just because of their behaviors during an emergency or a disaster style event? Those are other people you have to watch out for in any kind of an SHTF scenario. And what I mean by that is people with neurotic personalities or prior mental health conditions are the wild card factors in these situations. And it's not something that you need to profile necessarily, but it's something you have to be aware of. And the reason behind that is because people with those different thought processes in emergencies tend to act more irrationally than the average person. And sometimes that irrational behavior is dangerous for everyone else involved. And it's not necessarily about people becoming violent, but it can be about people not being concerned with their survival, which then in turn makes it less concerning for them about everyone else's survival, which means that the decisions they're making have nothing to do with the other people's survivability in the area that they're in. So that's something we have to watch out for as people who are more prepared. Okay, if you know that this person suffers from a neurotic personality, you have to understand that their anxiety during a situation of emergency is going to put them in positions that they're not comfortable in. And it might make them react in a way that could be irrational and cause a more dangerous situation. And so one way of thinking of that, just to kind of give you an idea, would be if somebody knew that the building was on fire and you had to make it down the stairwell in order to survive and escape. But they've decided, you know what, we're all gonna die. So they're just not gonna move, and suddenly everyone gets piled up behind them on the stairwell, and they have basically sealed everyone's fate because they've just made the decision that it's not really even worth trying to survive at this point. Okay, so that's just one example of how those people can become dangerous in any kind of an SHTF scenario. Short-term or long-term, because we know that those same people in a long-term SHTF event, especially if they don't receive any type of mental health care that they might need during that time, could become even more dangerous for many, many reasons, as we all know. But we as preppers can't just be prepared when it comes to having food. We can't just be prepared when it comes to having awesome gear and survival equipment. We have to also be prepared for how other people are going to react and how other people are going to approach different scenarios in a different way than we will. Okay? And that's something that we need to continually communicate with each other, because it is important to understand how people's behaviors will be during any kind of an SHTF event. So, most people are not preppers. So dealing with non-preppers in SHTF, it's already a guarantee. But knowing how these people will react when it comes to an emergency, when it comes to a disaster, when it comes to an extremely large SHTF scenario, that will help you be better prepared. It will help you strategize, and in many cases, probably help you become some kind of a leader or authority on survival in those scenarios. And you know what? That's not always the worst thing. I know a lot of people don't hope for anything like that when it comes to being put in a sudden leadership position, but if you can affect the narrative and help people come together to be a community and do what they got to do to survive to the next day, then that's something that we can all say is a positive. So think about how people will react. Think about everyone around you probably not being prepared, and think about how you need to be the level-headed, clear-minded person during any kind of an emergency, and it'll help you become that person regardless if you need to be that person for other people. Okay? So, just wanted to bring this up. I think that we all know there's also going to be danger in the sense of opportunists in any kind of a crisis situation, but that's something we're all very aware of already, and we know that those people exist and that they have a propensity to do things that we wish they wouldn't do. So, some might call them marauders. But that being said, I just wanted to let you guys know that dealing with preppers or dealing with non-preppers in SHTF, that's a real thing. That's going to be a guarantee. So do what you can now to understand how they'll react so you can react better. And without anything else to say about that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.